They abandoned me at the airport. 3 weeks later, I owned everything. And this is my real-life story. So it is the life lesson for others, so please like and subscribe for more life lessons. You ever have one of those moments that hits you so hard, it feels like the ground just fell out from under your feet? I'm not talking about a stumble or a trip. I'm talking about the whole world just dropping away, leaving you standing there with nothing but the echo of a lie in your ears and the cold realization that everything you thought was solid was just smoke. Mine happened at Gate B42, Chicago O'Hare, on a Tuesday afternoon with the rain sheeting down the windows like the sky was crying on my behalf. My own flesh and blood, my wife, my son, my daughter, they looked me right in the eye, handed me a coffee, told me to hold their seats while they used the restroom before our flight to the big family reunion, and then they vanished. They walked away, boarded a different plane to a tropical island without me, and left me sitting there like a forgotten suitcase. A 58-year-old man, a father, a husband, a guy who'd built a life with his own two calloused hands, waiting for a family that was already 30,000 feet in the air, laughing and toasting their new freedom. They thought I was dead weight, a boring, used-up old engine they could trade in for a newer model. They thought they could just discard me, leave me on the shelf. But they made one critical mistake. They forgot that an old engine, when it's been treated right for decades, knows every single sound, every vibration, every secret of the machine it powers. And when you kick it to the curb, sometimes it roars back to life. My name is Hank. This is the story of how they abandoned me at the airport, and how, just 3 weeks later, I came to own everything they held dear. Let me take you back before the fall to the life I thought was mine. For 35 years, I ran Hank's heavy machinery and repair out in Rockford, Illinois. A world of grease, diesel, and the honest satisfaction of fixing what was broken. Built from a single-bay garage into a respected outfit through sheer grit and calloused hands. While my wife Diane, my high school sweetheart, handled the books, the invoices, the bank, the digital world I never quite understood. And I trusted her completely because we'd shared a bed and dreams for over 3 decades. Building a modest, paid-off life with our 2 kids, Jason and Chloe, who'd grown into adults with expensive tastes and constant financial dramas, always coming to me, their personal ATM, for loans that never saw repayment, for bailouts from failed schemes and networking dinners, while I drove a 10-year-old truck and wore flannel from Sears, content with meatloaf and baseball on the radio, believing being a provider was my highest calling. Even as Diane's comments about being stuck in another century grew sharper, her eyes lingering on stories of friends' trips to Bora Bora, until she proposed the family reunion in Florida, booking the tickets herself as her treat. An unusually affectionate gesture in the weeks leading up, packing my bag, laying out my nice polo, with Jason and Chloe meeting us at the airport for the family trip. All buzzing with an energy I mistook for reconnection. Right up to the moment at Gate B42 when Diane handed me that bitter coffee, gave me a quick peck, and said they'd all hit the restroom and be right back. A lie so smooth it felt like truth, leaving me holding seats as the final boarding call echoed and my calls went straight to voicemail, leading to the gate agent's pitying look and the words, "They boarded. The flight has pushed back. It's gone," which shattered my reality, sending me adrift in a cab to an empty house where her note waited cold and final, telling me my life was small and gray, and the business accounts were handaged. A discovery confirmed at my dark, locked shop where login attempts failed and a bank agent's voice listed the brutal arithmetic of betrayal $285,000 vanished in transfers to Diane and an offshore bank, our savings wiped clean, leaving me sobbing on my desk. Not just abandoned but financially marooned, a deliberate act of war against my entire existence. That despair, however, eventually burned down to a cold, hard, focused anger, the kind I used to diagnose a machine's root failure, because a mechanic's job is solving problems, and my life was now the broken machine I had to fix, starting with the paper trail Diane thought obsolete. My leather-bound ledger of every handshake deal, cross-reference with invoices, leading me to the business loan files and critically to hidden folders for Jason's watch scheme, Chloe's Design LLC, and a new one, Azure Ventures LLC, with Diane as the member, a separate play I'd never known, photographs of which I took to my old lawyer Mike Sanderson, who confirmed this was premeditated financial annihilation, but asked the pivotal question. She thinks the assets she left are anchors. What do you think they are? That question was the spark. They weren't anchors. They were tools. My 2018 Peterbilt service truck, my 2022 excavator, the building on 2 prime industrial acres, and a master mechanic sees potential in tools. So I forged a Hank plan, not a legal one, to use that dead weight as a foundation. First by securing a lever and fulcrum, offering a partnership to Ron Big Dog Peterson, the gravel king who'd long coveted my back acre, proposing he buy a 40% stake to inject capital. A deal he accepted after scrutinizing my honest numbers, giving me the cash to stabilize the business loan and breathe, turning me from owner to silent partner in my own salvation, then working 18-hour days alone, rebranding into Miller Peterson 24/7 critical response, calling every old contact, undercutting competitors, becoming the go-to for nightmare breakdowns, the phone ringing with real work, the revenue flowing, while Mike filed the quiet legal groundwork, civil suits, fraud reports, a warning shot for them to hear, all as I pressure washed the shop floor and hit a hollow patch of concrete, unearthing a rusted ammo box my paranoid father-in-law Walter had hidden, containing bundles of old cash, dead stock certificates, and a game-changing notarized codicil to his will stating the land and building were mine, free and clear. A document Diane had hidden, meaning she'd fraudulently obtained our business loan. A theft spanning decades, not weeks. Which I revealed to Ron not to blow up our deal, but to renegotiate, forming Miller Peterson Industrial Holdings with me as the 60% controlling member based on my newfound clear title, using that equity for a real line of credit to expand, building 2 new warehouse bays for lease, creating a formal equipment leasing division, and within 3 weeks, with Betty the bookkeeper's summary in hand, I owned a debt-free property and a thriving, multifaceted empire, the pain now fused with purpose, setting the stage for the reckoning when their echoes from paradise arrived. First Chloe's gaslighting text, then their Miami lawyer's threatening notice, which Mike countered with an offensive of codicil evidence, fraud claims, and IRS alerts, prompting a worried email from Jason, and a meeting demand I forced to be in Rockford, where Diane, tanned and brittle, arrived with her slick lawyer while Jason and Chloe watched via video from a sunny balcony. And I laid out my terms not with emotion, but with cold accounting. The explosive growth summary of my new holdings, and a spreadsheet detailing $287,412 in loans to my children, offering them a choice: drop all claims and begin repaying, or face full legal and financial annihilation, before walking out, leaving a trap sprung that within 48 hours triggered their collapse. Dominoes falling, as Jason called, broken, revealing their scam artist venture capitalist had vanished with the money, leaving them broke and desperate. Chloe's texts devolving into panic pleas, and Diane's lawyer capitulating, their signatures on a full release arriving in exchange for begging the loan waiver, a surrender that left Diane a receptionist in Tampa, Jason humbly asking for labor work, and Chloe returning home to wait tables, the victory somber and heavy, the family fantasy destroyed with the malicious one, a cost paid in the quiet rubble of a battle ended. A year later the business grew, the bank lawsuit settled in my favor, the deed framed in my office, and on a cold Saturday Jason appeared at my shop, toolbox in hand, asking to learn, unpaid, to which I replied, "The coffee in the office. It's terrible. Get yourself a cup." Then grab a wire brush and start on the frame rust. A moment not of forgiveness, but of assessing salvageable parts, the tentative sound of something being rebuilt on a foundation of truth, as I finally understood that owning everything wasn't about the land or the money. It was about owning my integrity, the steadfast power from surviving the storm, and the unshakable knowledge that you can, with your own two hands, build something that lasts, proving that the best revenge isn't hatred. It's a quiet, unassailable harbor you build for yourself, letting that be your final, definitive answer. Let me paint you a picture of my life before that Tuesday. A life built not on flash but on foundation. A world where the measure of a man was in the grit under his nails and the weight of his word. Where I, Hank Miller, had operated for 35 years from the helm of Hank's heavy machinery and repair. In the unassuming, hard-working heart of Rockford, Illinois. A business that was the antithesis of a fancy corporate gig. Existing instead in the honest symphony of clanging metal. The perpetual scent of diesel fuel and hot welding rods that clung to my clothes like a second skin, and the deeply satisfying resonant clunk of a massive Caterpillar, engine roaring back to life after I'd spent hours, sometimes days, diagnosing its silent failures and nursing it patiently back to health with the hands of a craftsman who understood that machines, much like people, have souls that need careful, respectful tending. I built that kingdom from nothing but a single-bay garage, a loan from a skeptical bank, and a back that didn't know the meaning of quit, transforming it through decades of dawn-to-dusk labor into a respected outfit that serviced half the construction companies across 3 counties, a place where foremen knew my name and trusted my work because I never cut a corner, never charged for a ghost hour, and always stood behind the repair. My hands serving as a living roadmap of that entire journey. Each scar a story, like the one on my left thumb from a wrench that slipped while torquing a stubborn bolt on a frigid January morning. The shiny, smooth burns on my forearms from brushing against exhaust manifolds that whispered of rushed jobs to get a critical piece of equipment back on a deadline-driven site. And my knuckles, permanently etched and stained with a grime so deep and earned that no industrial soap, no matter how strong, could ever completely touch it. A badge of honor I wore without even thinking about it. My wife Diane, she was my anchor through all of it. My high school sweetheart I'd met at the county fair when I was a skinny kid, desperately trying to win her a oversized, poorly made stuffed bear at the ring toss, spending my last $5 on rings that always fell short until she laughed and said the effort was better than any prize. And we built a simple, solid life from that moment. A modest, paid-off house with a porch that needed painting. 2 kids we poured our hopes into, Jason and Chloe. And a partnership I believed was unshakable because we were a team. Or so I thought, with me serving as the muscle and the intuitive know-how on the shop floor. The guy who could listen to a misfire and pinpoint the problem before the computer diagnostics even finished their scan. While Diane was the brains behind the paperwork, the one who typed up the invoices with careful efficiency, managed the accounts, talked to the bank in a language of spreadsheets and projections that sounded like static to my ears. And I trusted her with every fiber of my being, with the complete, unguarded faith of a man who'd shared a bed, a life, and quiet dreams for our kids for over 3 decades, never once imagining the balance sheet of our marriage was being calculated in a currency I didn't understand. The kids, well, they were my heart, but they grew into adults who saw my world through a very different lens. Jason, my boy at 32, was always brimming with big ideas, chasing the fast life in the quick score. His head in the clouds with schemes that sparkled with promised millions, but crumbled upon contact with reality. A foray into day trading that evaporated a chunk of savings. A half-baked app idea he wanted to develop for organizing garage tools. The irony wasn't lost on me. A brief, disastrous stint selling luxury watches online that ended with him holding inventory he couldn't move. And he'd always come back to me, hat in hand, with that sheepish look saying, "Just a loan to get me back on my feet, Pop." And I'd bail him out every single time, writing the check because I believed in supporting his ambitions, in being the safety net he could always fall into. Chloe, my 29-year-old princess, dreamed in color swatches and architectural digest spreads, wanting to be an interior designer for the rich and famous, moving to the city where she racked up terrifying credit card debt on designer handbags and fancy dinners she called networking, calling me with her voice dripping honeyed sugar, saying, "Daddy, I just need a little help this month. The client payment is delayed." And I'd wire the money without a second thought, feeling a father's pride in being able to provide to smooth her path. I was their safety net, their personal ATM, and I didn't see it as being used. I saw it as my sacred role, my purpose. The provider, the rock, the man who fixes things because that's what a man does, right? He takes care of his family, even if it means his own world stays small and familiar. Meanwhile, I was still driving the same 10-year-old pickup truck. Its bed scarred from hauling engine blocks and its interior smelling permanently of oil and old coffee. Still wearing the same rotation of flannel shirts bought on sale from Sears. My idea of a big, luxurious night being a plate of Diane's meatloaf, a side of mashed potatoes, and the comforting, static-laced sound of a baseball game on the old radio in my garage. A sanctuary of simplicity. Diane, though, had started to make comments that drifted into our conversations like a cold draft. Subtle jabs like, "Hank, you're stuck in another century," or "Look at the Millers, they just got back from Bora Bora." Jim Miller knows how to live, and I just shrug, wiping my hands on a rag and say, "We're building for the future, Di. The business is our future. This is all for the kids, for our retirement." Completely blind to the fact that the future they were building in their minds was a blueprint that had carefully, callously erased me from the picture. The family reunion was Diane's idea, a gathering of her side of the family for a big shindig in Florida, and she'd booked the tickets herself, insisting, "My treat. You've worked so hard, let me handle this one," a gesture I found sweet, a glimmer of the old affection, and she was unusually attentive in the weeks leading up to it, packing my bag for me, laying out my one nice polo shirt, her movements buzzing with a nervous energy I mistook for excitement. The day of the flight, that energy was electric. Jason and Chloe met us at the airport, all smiles, with Chloe throwing her arms around me saying, "We'll all fly down together, make it a family trip." And it felt good. It felt like maybe the drift I'd sensed was ending, like we were reconnecting on common ground. We checked in, got through security with the usual hassle, and I remember standing at the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the colossal planes push back and taxi, feeling a rare, expansive sense of peace. Thinking this was what it was all for, this moment of togetherness. Diane approached, handing me a steaming cup of black coffee. "Here, honey, you look tired. Jason, Chloe, come on, let's all hit the restroom before the long flight. Hank, hold our seats, okay? We'll be right back." She gave me a quick, dry peck on the cheek, the last touch, the final physical lie in a lifetime of them. I sat there in the molded plastic chair, sipping that bitter, overbrewed coffee, watching the minute hand on the terminal clock jerk forward with agonizing slowness. 15 minutes melted into 30. The final boarding call for our flight to Tampa blared over the crackling speakers, a jarring, urgent sound that sliced through my complacency. I started to sweat, a cold, clammy feeling at the base of my neck. I pulled out my phone, my thumbs clumsy, and called Diane's cell, straight to voicemail. Jason's phone voicemail, Chloe's phone voicemail. A cold dread like ice water injected directly into my veins began to seep through my core, numbing my fingers. I hurried to the gate agent's desk, my heart hammering a wild, frantic rhythm against my ribs. "My family," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "They were on this flight. Have they boarded?" The agent, a young guy with a bored, world-weary look, scanned his monitor. Name: Miller, Hank, Diane, Jason, Chloe. He tapped his keyboard with practiced indifference, his eyes flicking over the screen. I show a Diane, Jason, and Chloe Miller checked in and boarded. No Hank Miller on this manifest. The words didn't make sense. They were nonsense syllables, bouncing around my skull without forming coherent meaning. That's impossible. We're together." He looked up then and gave me a pitying look I will carry to my grave, a mix of professional sympathy and personal relief that he wasn't the one standing in my shoes. "Sir, I'm sorry. They boarded. The flight is pushed back. It's gone. And just like that, the world I had spent a lifetime building, bolt by trusted bolt, vanished into the gray Chicago sky, leaving me alone on solid ground with nothing but the echo of a lie and the crumbling blueprint of a life that had never been what I believed it to be. I stood there at Gate B-42, a statue of a man, long after the jet bridge had been retracted with a final, hydraulic sigh, long after the plane itself had become just a distant, ghostly shape taxiing away into the gray Chicago gloom, swallowed by the low-hanging clouds and the sheeting rain that now seemed less like weather and more like the world weeping for a fool. The river of humanity, the excited families, the hurried business travelers, the weary vacationers, flowed around me as if I were a rock in their current, an inconvenient obstacle to be sidestepped with averted eyes and slight adjustments in trajectory, their conversations and rolling suitcases creating a din that melted in my ears into a single dull, roaring hum, a white noise of normalcy that felt utterly alien. Gone. They boarded. The flight has pushed back. The agent's words were on a relentless, cruel loop in my mind, a scratched record skipping over the moment my life fractured, and I felt hollowed out, scooped clean, an empty vessel that had once been labeled husband, father, provider, now just a 58-year-old landmark declared obsolete and demolished without a single moment's notice or a shred of ceremonial wrecking ball dignity. Mechanically, my body operating on some basal instinct of self-preservation my mind had already abandoned, I bent and picked up the carry-on bag, the one Diane had packed with such apparent care, and I walked, my legs moving without conscious instruction, one heavy foot in front of the other, through the terminal's endless, bright corridors that felt like a maze designed for my disorientation. My mind was a frantic, scrambling mess of denial, a trapped animal seeking any exit from the cage of this new reality. There had to be a mistake, a computer glitch, a mix-up at the check-in counter. Maybe they were at the wrong gate. Maybe they'd misunderstood the boarding time and were frantically searching for me at another concourse right this second. Maybe any second Diane would come rushing around the corner, breathless and apologetic, with a perfectly reasonable explanation that would make me feel silly for this cold dread. But the cold, logical part of my brain, the engineer, the diagnostician, the part that could listen to a hydraulic system and pinpoint a leak from 20 feet away by the faintest, most subtle change in pitch, knew better, and its voice was a merciless whisper cutting through the panic. The coordinated silence of all three phones going straight to voicemail, the uncharacteristic, almost cloying affection of the past few weeks, the very fact that she had insisted on booking the tickets herself and handling all the arrangements. This was not an accident. This was a plan, a deliberate, calculated, and meticulously executed action. I ended up, without really deciding to, at a bleak airport bar tucked between a newsstand and a shoeshine stand, the kind of place with sticky floors that pulled at my soles, dim lights that hid the wear on the vinyl stools, and a pervasive smell of stale beer and disinfectant. I slid onto a stool, the weight of my body feeling unfamiliar, and ordered a whiskey neat, my voice a gravelly sound I didn't recognize, and finally fumbled my phone out of my pocket, my fingers thick and clumsy as if they were swollen. I called Diane's number again, listening to the familiar yet now sinister ringtone cut straight into her breezy voicemail greeting. I called Jason, voicemail, Chloe, voicemail. I sent text messages, my thumbs stumbling over the keys. Where are you? Then the plane left without us, and finally a pathetic, "Are you okay?" The silence that followed was absolute, a void more deafening than any shouted insult or slammed door. It was the confirmation, the active choice to not respond, to sever the connection completely, and it landed in my gut with the finality of a judge's gavel. Numb, my vision tunneling, I scrolled through my contacts, a list of names that suddenly meant nothing, and landed on my brother Dave in Milwaukee, pressing the call button as if it were a lifeline to a world that still made sense. "Dave," I said when he answered, my voice sounding foreign, cracked like old leather. "Hank, you sound awful. What's wrong?" And I told him, the story spilling out in broken, inelegant sentences. The airport, the gate, the coffee, the missing family, the agent's words. The long, terrible pause on the other end of the line was more terrifying than any immediate response. It was the silence of dreadful knowledge. Then he sighed, a heavy, weary exhalation that traveled down the wire and into my soul. "Ah, Hank, I didn't want to be the one to tell you." "Tell me what?" I asked, though a part of me already knew, already felt the next blow coming. "I saw Diane last week, downtown. She was having lunch at that fancy bistro on Main with some slick-looking guy in a suit. Older, silver hair, looked like money. I thought it was a business meeting for the company, but the body language, Hank, it didn't look businesslike. They were leaning in, laughing. His hand was on her arm. I tried to call you after, but I chickened out. I didn't want to start trouble if it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was everything. The final, jagged piece of the puzzle, and it sliced through the last fragile threads of my denial with the precision of a shard of glass, leaving me bleeding internally in that awful airport bar. I paid for the whiskey I hadn't tasted, gathered my bag, and took a cab home. The ride a blur of wet streets and silent, stoic driver, arriving at the house that now felt like a stage set after the play has ended, and the actors have all gone home. The empty house that afternoon was a museum dedicated to a lie. Every familiar object, the sofa where we watched movies, the dining table where we argued about bills, the hallway photos of smiling vacations, now artifacts of a history that had been fictional. The quiet was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating, pressing in on my eardrums. I walked upstairs, each step an effort, and went to our bedroom. Diane's side of the walk-in closet was half empty, neat gaps where her better dresses, her winter coats had hung. Her good jewelry box, the one with the velvet lining, was gone from the top of her dresser. I moved like a ghost through my own home, into Jason's old room, where his high school trophies and a dusty poster of a rock band remained, but his sleek laptop, his expensive digital camera, the leather jacket he loved, gone. Chloe's room was the same eerie tableau. Childhood stuffed animals on the bed, but the closet was stripped of her designer pieces, the vanity cleared of her expensive makeup. They hadn't packed for a week in Florida. They had packed for a new life, a permanent exodus. In the kitchen, the heart of the home that had stopped beating, propped against the coffee maker I'd fixed a dozen times, was the note. Not even in an envelope. No semblance of privacy or gravitas, just a single sheet of her fancy cream-colored monogrammed paper. The handwriting was undeniably Diane's, that looping, confident script, but the words belonged to a stranger, a cold and dismissive stranger. "Hank, by the time you read this, we'll be gone. We can't do this anymore. Your life is small and gray. We want color. We want excitement. We're starting over. Don't try to find us. The business accounts are handled. Just move on. It's for the best, Diane. The business accounts are handled." That phrase, with its ellipsis of guilt, sent a different kind of chill through me, cutting through the heartache with the sharp, practical terror of financial ruin. This wasn't just an emotional desertion. This was a fiscal scorched earth policy. I threw on my coat over the polo shirt she'd laid out and drove straight to my shop, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white, the streets passing in a smear of streetlights and rain. Hank's heavy machinery, the sign I'd painted myself, the letters slightly uneven, welcomed me to the scene of the next crime. The bay doors were locked under the dreary dusk. I used my key, the metal cold in my fingers. Inside it was dark, cavernous, and cold, the familiar smells of oil and metal now smelling only of abandonment. I went to the small, cluttered office in the back, booted up the ancient desktop computer that whirred and groaned to life, its glow the only light in the room. I tried to log into the business bank account. The screen flashed, access DE&IED. The password had been changed. My personal online banking. Same result, access DE&IED. A new, raw fury began to mix with the despair, a burning in my chest. I called the bank's 24-hour line, my hands shaking as I navigated the automated menu, finally reaching a human agent after an eternity of hold music. After verifying my identity with what felt like 1,000 intrusive questions, the agent, her voice professionally neutral, told me, Mr. Miller, I'm showing two large electronic transfers from the business operating account yesterday. One for $85,000 to a personal account under the name Diane Miller, and another for $150,000 to an institution listed as the First Cayman Bank, Limited. Additionally, your joint personal savings account shows a withdrawal of $50,000 yesterday via wire transfer. She was reading numbers, but they were explosions in my head, each one detonating a part of my future. The $85,000 was the operational liquidity, the money for parts, payroll, and fuel. The $150,000 was the business's retained earnings, the fruit of years of labor, now exiled to some tropical island haven. The $50,000 was our life savings, the cushion for emergencies, the dream fund for retirement that would now never happen. They had cleaned me out with surgical, merciless precision. They had taken every liquid cent, the lifeblood of the business, the security of our savings, and vanished. They left me with the physical assets, the building, the trucks, the tools, and a business skeleton that couldn't function without cash to pay suppliers, the part-time employees, or the looming monthly note on the newer crane, a debt that would now suffocate me. They hadn't just left me at the airport. They had marooned me on a financial island with no way to call for help, surrounded by a sea of responsibilities I could no longer meet. The sheer, colossal weight of it, the betrayal, the deception, the financial abyss, finally crushed what was left of my composure. I put my head down on the cold, hard surface of the metal desk, my cheek against a grease-stained invoice, surrounded by the manuals and parts catalogs that documented my life's work. And for the first time since my father died, I wept. Not just silent tears, but great, heaving, body-racking sobs that tore from a place so deep and wounded I felt they might physically break me in two. They hadn't just betrayed my trust. They had declared total war on my entire existence, and in that dark, cold office, I was the lone, shattered casualty on the battlefield of the life I thought I'd built. Time lost all meaning as I sat there in the profound dark of my shop, hunched over that cold metal desk, the echoes of my own sobs the only sound in the vast, hollow space. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. A suspended animation of pure grief where the world outside ceased to spin. But eventually, the well of tears ran completely dry, scraped down to a barren, dusty bottom, and what surfaced in its place wasn't a continuation of that soul-crushing sadness. It was a metamorphosis into something else entirely. A cold, hard, diamond-focused anger, a sensation as familiar to my hands as the grip of a wrench. The same defensive, territorial fury that ignited in my chest when a once-trusted customer tried to stiff me on a major repair bill, questioning my integrity and the quality of my work with lies and evasion. They thought I was done, a finished product, that I would simply crumple under the weight of their betrayal and fade quietly into the gray oblivion they believed was my natural habitat. They saw a simple, old mechanic, a relic who understood gears and grease but not the complexities of life or finance. What they failed to understand in their fatal miscalculation is that a mechanic's entire purpose, his very essence, is solving problems. It's a process of calm, logical triage, diagnosing the precise point of failure, tracing the issue back to its root cause with patient deduction, and then methodically, piece by carefully considered piece, fixing what's broken, whether it's a seized engine or a shattered life. My life was the broken machine now, a complex system sabotaged from within, and I was the only mechanic left in the shop qualified to even attempt the repair. First, I needed light, both literal and metaphorical. I needed to cast a beam into the wreckage and see the full, unvarnished extent of the damage. I got up, my joints aching with a stiffness that felt more emotional than physical, a profound weariness in my bones, and I flipped on the master bank of shop lights. The long fluorescent tubes flickered and buzzed reluctantly to life, their harsh, blue-white glow flooding the bays and illuminating my kingdom of steel and grease. A cathedral of practicality that was not just my business but my very fingerprint. A place where I knew the history of every bolt, the story behind every weld, the peculiarities of every piece of equipment that had ever passed through these doors. Diane had handled the ephemeral digital world, the abstract numbers dancing on a screen, but I held the tangible, immutable truth in my hands, and in this space, I started where I had always started on any complex job, with the paper trail. Diane was savvy with digital transfers and online banking, but she was impatient and messy with physical records, considering them obsolete clutter. To me, they were the bedrock, the original source code. I pulled out the heavy, leather-bound ledger I'd kept faithfully since day one, its cover worn smooth and stained at the corners, its pages filled with my own cramped shorthand. Every cash job for a farmer who paid with a handshake, every handshake deal with a foreman in a pinch, every used pot bought from old Larry at the scrapyard for a song, a chronicle of trust and hard work. I cross-referenced these entries with the filed carbon copy invoices in the steel cabinets, building a picture of real value that existed outside any computer system. Then, I went digging deeper into the more ominous files. I pulled the thick folder for our original business loan from First Rockford Trust, examining the payment schedules, the grim clauses, the collateral listed. The building, the land, and my 3 best pieces of equipment were all tied to that debt. If I missed payments, the bank would take it all, leaving me with nothing but the clothes on my back. Then a thought emerged, a mean, dark little seedling of an idea pushing through the anger. I remember Diane complaining, with that particular mix of exasperation and pride, about Jason's brilliant watch scheme a year or so back. She'd mumbled something about him needing an EIN, an employer identification number from the IRS to set up a legitimate-looking business account for it. And I'd sat right at this very desk and helped my boy fill out those government forms, my hand guiding his. He wanted it to look legit. Acting on a hunch, I went to the 4-drawer filing cabinet labeled Taxes and Legal, its lock long since broken, and started rifling through the hanging folders, my fingers dusty. Bingo! Not just Jason's paperwork neatly filed. I found a folder for Chloe's short-lived Chloe Marie Designs LLC, and then, tucked behind them as if hidden in plain sight, a folder I had never seen before, its tab neatly typed, Azure Ventures LLC. My heart stuttered. I pulled it out. The registration papers listed a registered agent at a lawyer's office in Delaware, and the sole member listed was Diane K. Miller. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful hitch. This was new. This was her separate play, a side venture I knew nothing about, a secret company formed in the shadows of our marriage. I took my phone, my hands now steady, and photographed every page of every document, capturing the evidence. The next morning, after a sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling of my shop office from the lumpy couch, I put on my cleanest, least grease-stained work shirt, the one I kept for meetings with suppliers, and went to see my lawyer, Mike Sanderson, whose office smelled of old books and strong coffee. Mike and I went way back. He'd done the initial incorporation paperwork for the business 20 years ago, a no-nonsense man with a military flat-top haircut that never changed and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. I laid it all out on his massive, scarred oak desk, the airport abandonment, the cruel note, the drained accounts with their devastating numbers, and the new LLC documents. Mike listened in complete silence, steepling his fingers under his chin. When I finished, he let out a long, low whistle. "Hank, this is premeditated financial annihilation. It's civil, it's possibly criminal fraud, depending on how she orchestrated those transfers. But here's the hard, ugly truth you need to hear. Litigation is a slow, grinding glacier. It's prohibitively expensive. And if they've truly gone offshore with those funds, enforcing any judgment we might win is a multi-year international nightmare. They're betting everything that you'll run out of steam, out of money, and out of will long before you can ever lay a finger on them." The hopelessness, that black tide, threatened to surge back and drown the spark of my anger. "So that's it, they just win." Mike leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his gaze intent. Not necessarily. The law is one path, a noisy, crowded highway. But you said she took the liquid cash, the easy money. What about the assets she left behind? The business itself, the property, the equipment. She obviously thinks they're anchors, dead weight, a burden. What do you think they are, Hank? I drove back to the shop in a daze, Mike's question ringing in my head like a struck bell over and over. What do you think they are? I didn't go inside immediately. Instead, I walked slowly through the main bay, my boots echoing on the concrete. I stopped in front of my 2018 Peterbilt service truck, its state-of-the-art crane and welder a testament to capability. I looked at my 2022 heavy-duty field excavator, nearly paid off, a beast of pure potential. I gazed up at the building itself, sturdy and sprawling on 2 acres of land zoned for industrial use, sitting right off the interstate with its own access road. To Diane, these were just line items on a burdensome balance sheet, illiquid and difficult to sell quickly. To the slick guy in the suit, they were probably worthless junk beneath his notice. To me, they were tools, precision instruments of creation and repair. And a master mechanic never, ever looks at a quality tool and sees worthlessness. He sees its potential energy. He sees the specific, important job it was built to do. A plan, raw and jagged but fiercely bright, began to form in the depths of my mind. It wasn't a lawyer's plan. It was a Hank plan. They wanted to leave me with what they saw as dead weight. Fine. I would use that very weight, that solid, tangible mass, to build a foundation so immovably strong I would come to own the very ground they once believed they had escaped. The first flicker of revenge, then, wasn't about hurting them yet. It was about the most fundamental repair job of my life, saving myself. It was about proving, first and foremost to the man in the mirror, that I was not, and never would be, obsolete. What comes next was a complete and utter metamorphosis, a phoenix rising not from ashes but from poured concrete, forged steel, and a newfound, unshakable will. With the land title legally cleared through Mike Swift, aggressive filings and my partnership with Ron Peterson solidified on new, more powerful and respectful terms, I stood upon a foundation of absolute granite, a bedrock of pure equity with no bank's shadow looming over it. This wasn't just stability, it was potential energy waiting to be unleashed. I used that pristine, unleveraged equity as impeccable collateral to secure a new, substantial business line of credit from a smaller local community bank where Diane had no history and no contacts, a deliberate choice to insulate my future from her past. This credit line wasn't a lifeline for survival anymore. It was a war chest for deliberate, strategic expansion. My first offensive was to leverage my most potent, immediate weapon, my own expertise and reputation for crisis repair. I rebranded Hank's Heavy Machinery into Miller Peterson 24/7 Critical Response, a name that signaled capability, partnership, and relentless availability. I went to a regional auction and, using a fraction of the new credit, bought 2 more used but fundamentally sound service trucks, spending long nights in the shop bringing them up to my exacting standards, installing new welders, organizing tool compartments, and painting them with the new, bold logo. I then hired 2 young, hungry mechanics I'd known since they were eager kids in vocational school, men whose eyes still held a passion for the craft, and I paid them a solid wage with a transparent profit-sharing bonus structure. Their loyalty was earned daily, directed at the quality of the work and the fairness of the paycheck, not to familial obligation or a name. We became the legendary go-to crew for the region's most disastrous industrial breakdowns, the cavalry called when everything had stopped. A frozen, critical pump at the county water treatment plant at 2 a.m. on a sub-zero January night. We were there, our breath plumbing in the work lights, until it churned back to life. A blown high-pressure hydraulic line on $1 million logging skidder, deep in a muddy forest with no cell service. We navigated the backroads and field serviced it on-site, getting the operator back to work by midday. Our reputation spread through the gritty grapevine of foremen and plant managers, not with cheap advertising, but through the relentless currency of results. We weren't always the cheapest, but we were indisputably the fastest, the most reliable, and we embodied a single powerful principle. We never ever said no. The revenue from this division began to flow in, not as a trickle but as a strong, steady, predictable river, covering payroll, expenses, and then some. But the repair business, as vital as it was merely the powerful engine. I was now thinking in terms of building the entire vehicle. I walked my 2 acres with a developer's eye. Ron was already using the back acre for his gravel storage, a symbiotic arrangement. The front acre, anchored by my original shop building, held untapped potential. I drew up simple, functional, no-frills plans for 2 additional warehouse bays, structures meant for utility, not show. I didn't intend to use them myself. They were pure investment meant for lease. Using the business line of credit, I broke ground, overseeing the construction myself, ensuring it was done right and on budget. Within 6 relentless weeks, I had 2 pristine, 3,000 square foot, insulated and secure warehouse spaces with roll-up doors and concrete aprons. I didn't place a single ad. Ron mentioned it to a friend who needed overflow storage for his booming plumbing supply business. I called a contractor I'd done a huge favor for years ago who was desperate for a secure, fenced yard to park his fleet of skid steers. They signed leases on the spot, multi-year agreements. This was passive income, beautiful and silent, money that materialized in the account while I slept, whether I was turning a wrench or not. Then, I turned my attention to formalizing the equipment leasing idea that had been a seed in my mind. I created a separate professional catalog, complete with photos and clear specifications, for my excavator, my bulldozer, my growing fleet of generators and light towers. I hired a sharp part-time college kid to manage the online bookings and scheduling through a simple website. Contractors could now rent my high-quality gear by the week, the month, or even the day, a flexible solution that filled a massive need in the market. It was, as the kid said, like airborne for heavy machinery. Every single asset that Diane had looked upon as an anchor, a cumbersome, illiquid relic, was now actively printing money, each piece of iron earning its keep in multiple, innovative ways. 3 weeks. That was the breathtaking, condensed timeline from the soul-crushing moment at Gate B42 to the day I sat down in my newly organized office with my new bookkeeper. A stern, magnificently efficient woman named Betty who asked 0 personal questions and demanded perfect receipts, and looked at the first consolidated profit and loss statement from Miller Peterson Industrial Holdings. The numbers told a story of breathtaking resurrection. The critical response repair division was solidly, robustly profitable. The equipment leasing division was booked solid for the next 2 months with a waiting list. The warehouse rentals were already bringing in a reliable 5 figures every single month. The business line of credit was barely touched, a reserve of power. My personal account, now fiercely separate and guarded with new passwords only I knew, showed a balance that was actually growing, not hemorrhaging. In just 21 days, I had not just salvaged my business from the scrap heap. I had multiplied its inherent value several times over, transforming it into a diversified, resilient empire. I owned a debt-free property, a thriving, multifaceted operation, and something whose value no bank could ever quantify. My own restored, steel-clad self-respect. The deep, bruising pain of their betrayal was still there, a constant, familiar ache in the center of my chest, but it was now fused, alloyed with a relentless, driving purpose that gave it a strange, productive power. They had wanted to see me broken, discarded, and fading into a gray oblivion. Instead, through their act of abandonment, they had unknowingly become the forge, and I had been tempered into something infinitely harder, sharper, and more dangerous. I was no longer just Hank the mechanic, the fixer. I was Hank the owner, the operator, the architect of my own destiny. And this construction project, I knew with a cold certainty, was only just beginning. The next phase, the blueprint now clear in my mind, was no longer about merely building wealth or security. It was about strategic reclamation. It was about taking back, piece by deliberate piece, everything that was rightfully mine, and in the process, systematically dismantling the gilded, illusory world they believed they had so cleverly escaped to. The first echo from their carefully constructed paradise came not as a thunderclap, but as a faint, distorted vibration through the legal wires, relayed to me by Mike, my lawyer, who informed me with dry satisfaction that the civil suit and fraud complaint papers we'd filed had finally been served. Or more accurately, that diligent attempts at service had been made at their last known stateside addresses, a procedural formality that was nonetheless a direct tap on the shoulder to their new reality. This administrative tap sent an immediate, palpable ripple through whatever sun-drenched digital illusion they were inhabiting, because within 48 hours, I received my first direct communication from them in over a month, not a phone call where I might hear a quiver of guilt or fear, but a sterile text message from a number with a Florida area code I didn't recognize. It was from Chloe, and the words, when I read them, ignited a cold fire in my veins. "Daddy, how could you? Mom is devastated. We just needed space. Now you're trying to sue us. After everything you put us through. We have legal counsel too, you know, a very good firm. Stop this madness." I read the message 5 times, each pass stripping away another layer of my former self, the part of me that might have felt a pang of paternal guilt, until all that remained was a crystal-clear view of the audacity, the breathtaking, complete rewriting of history they were attempting. After everything you put us through. The gaslighting was so profound it was almost artistic, a masterclass in psychological inversion, where the perpetrators now donned the robes of victimhood with practiced ease. My finger hovered over the reply button on my phone screen, and 1,000 furious, hurtful, cathartic replies flashed through my mind like lightning. But the new Hank, the strategist, the CEO of his own fate, knew better. Raw anger was a tool to be forged and used at the precise moment, not a knee-jerk reaction to be displayed for their benefit or my temporary relief. I didn't reply. I let the message sit there, read and ignored, a silent monument to my indifference. Silence in that moment was my most potent weapon. Let them wonder. Let them sit on their expensive balcony surrounded by tropical sunshine and feel the first, insidious chill of uncertainty seep into their paradise, the unsettling realization that the man they thought they could discard was not crying into his beer, but was, in fact, building something that could reach back and touch them. A few days later, the second, more formal echo arrived. My bookkeeper, Betty, called me into the office with her usual no-nonsense tone. "Hank, we just received a formal notice via courier from a law firm, Kessler and Blythe out of Miami, Florida." She handed me the thick, creamy envelope. The letter inside was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, full of phrases like spurious document, fraudulent conveyance, and equitable distribution. They were challenging the validity of the codicil I'd discovered and were asserting Diane's claim to sole ownership of the property. Further, they were demanding a full accounting of all business revenues since her departure, claiming her rightful community property share. A grim, satisfied smile touched my lips for the first time in weeks. So, they'd lawyered up with a fancy, expensive Miami firm, their names now on a letterhead that probably cost more than my old monthly mortgage payment. They were playing the high-stakes legal card, exactly as Mike had predicted they would, believing that geographical distance and the implied financial weight of a glossy out-of-state firm could intimidate a simple mechanic from Rockford. I scanned the document, then called Mike and forwarded him a copy immediately. "It's showtime, Hank," he said, a note of fierce anticipation in his voice. "They've taken the bait. They're now fully engaging on the battlefield they arrogantly assume they control." Mike's response was not a defensive crouch, but a masterpiece of legal jiu-jitsu, using their own aggressive momentum against them. He didn't merely file a response defending the codicil, he launched a multi-pronged offensive. He filed a countermotion that attached not only the original codicil, but also the notarized signature of the long-deceased notary public, whose archival records we had meticulously tracked down at the county clerk's office, and a sworn affidavit from Walter's sole surviving sister, a frail but sharp woman of 90 who recalled her brother muttering about, making sure that good boy Hank was taken care of for giving me a purpose. More critically, Mike filed a separate, severe legal action for the immediate return of the fraudulently transferred funds, attaching the damning bank records and highlighting the criminal timing, the day before their orchestrated flight. As a final, elegant twist of the knife, he quietly notified the IRS, via formal channels, of the discovered cash hoard, suggesting Diane may have committed serious tax fraud by failing to report a substantial sum of inherited income. The legal battle was now a chaotic, multi-front war for them, and each new front was exponentially expensive. Every single hour their high-priced Miami lawyers spent drafting motions, making calls and strategizing, was an hour billed against the finite pile of money they had stolen from me. I was, in a brutal irony, indirectly funding their own legal defense with their pilfered ammunition, and watching with cold satisfaction as it drained their resources day by day. Then came the third echo, the most telling one yet, arriving not as a text or a formal letter but as an email, this time from Jason. The subject line was a pathetic, transparent plea: "We need to talk." The tone inside was markedly different from Chloe's aggressive text. It was less accusatory, stripped of its former bluster, laced with a new, palpable worry. "Pop, look, this is getting out of hand. Mom's lawyer says this could drag on for years. We're family. Can't we settle this like adults? Maybe we can come to some arrangement. You clearly don't understand the pressure we were under. Let's have a conversation." The translation was as clear as the numbers on Betty's spreadsheets. Their stolen war chest was running out faster than they'd ever anticipated, and the legal morass they'd hoped would crush me was now a quicksand pit swallowing them whole. The island paradise, funded by fraud and deception, was starting to feel less like an escape and more like a gilded, inescapable cage. I printed the email and showed it to Ron over a cup of the terrible tar-like coffee we brewed in the shop office. He read it, his eyes scanning the lines, and then he chuckled, a dry, raspy sound of pure contempt. "The vultures are getting real nervous when the carcass they picked over starts getting up and fighting back," he mused, setting the paper down. "What were you gonna do?" I didn't answer immediately. I turned my chair and looked out the grimy office window at the vibrant, noisy kingdom now thriving in the morning light. A Miller Peterson service truck rolling out on a new job, its logo bright. A forklift operator moving pallets into one of the new warehouse bays. The steady hum of a generator being tested in the leasing yard. I watched the tangible proof of my resurrection, the empire built from their discarded anchors. Then I turned back to Ron, my face a mask of calm resolve. I'm going to let them come to me," I said to Ron, my voice calm and measured as we stood overlooking the bustling yard of Miller Peterson Holdings, the air filled with the sounds of progress. "But they will come entirely on my terms." Jason's pleading email was a significant crack in their previously impervious armor, the first undeniable flicker of genuine desperation breaking through their facade of offended superiority. They were psychologically conditioned to me jumping immediately, obediently, whenever they called. The old Hank, the fixer, the appeaser, would have booked the next flight to Miami, hat literally in hand, heart wide open, just for the fragile chance to lay eyes on them again, to hear their voices, to try and mend what was broken with pleas and promises. The new Hank, the strategist forged in betrayal and hardened by solitary triumph, understood the profound, unnerving power of deliberate silence, of making them wait and stew in the consequences of their own actions, of forcing them to physically and emotionally travel back to the very small and gray world they had so publicly and contemptuously left behind. A world that was now, unbeknownst to them, entirely under my control. I waited 3 full, agonizing days for them, letting the void of my non-response eat away at their certainty, allowing the specter of my lawsuits and the looming IRS investigation to grow larger and more menacing in their minds with each passing, silent hour. Then, I had Betty, my impeccably professional bookkeeper, draft the reply from a generic, newly created business email address that gave nothing away. The message was intentionally cold, surgically professional, and utterly devoid of any familial emotion or personal appeal. Mr. Miller acknowledges your communication. He is willing to discuss a potential settlement. All discussions must be in person at the offices of Sanderson Legal in Rockford. Dates are available in 2 weeks' time. Please advise which parties will be attending. I sign it with a deliberate, impersonal finality. H. Miller, Managing Member, Miller Peterson Holdings. Not Dad. Not Hank. Not even Henry. Just H. Miller, a title. A position, a deliberate, unbreachable wall constructed of accomplishment and resolve. The reply from their camp came swiftly, but this time it was from Diane's Miami lawyer Aldridge, a man who clearly believed his letterhead conferred intimidation. They countered my demand, proposing a neutral location, such as a prestigious law firm in downtown Chicago. A place they assumed would be more comfortable for their newly acquired cosmopolitan sensibilities, and far from the humbling, familiar streets of my hometown. Mike, following my explicit, unwavering instruction, was an immovable object in his response, his wording leaving no room for negotiation. Our client's business operations demand his physical presence locally. The meeting will be in Rockford, or there will be no meeting. The offer to talk will be formally withdrawn at 5:00 p.m. Central Time tomorrow. It was a deliberate power play, a critical test of their pride and their financial stamina. With their newfound, sun-bleached sense of superiority, their belief that they had transcended this provincial place, allow them to swallow that pride and physically crawl back to the source of their original sin. The answer arrived just before the deadline the following evening, in a terse email of resentful acceptance. Diane and attorney Aldrich would attend. A separate telling line noted that Jason and Chloe would be available via video conference if necessary. Cowards, I thought with cold clarity. They wanted to observe from the safe, sterile distance of a digital screen, thousands of miles away, insulated by pixels and palm trees, avoiding the palpable gravity of the room. That was perfectly fine with me. Their reluctance to appear in the flesh told me everything I needed to know about the crumbling chain of command. It was still Diane, the general, calling the shots. And now, by her own forced choice, she was marching her expensive counsel directly into my territory, onto ground I now owned in every conceivable sense. The day of the meeting, I dressed with purposeful intent, not in a suit. I didn't own one that fit the man I had become, and purchasing one felt like a concession to their world of artifice. But in a pair of crisp, new dark jeans, my cleanest, most reliable work boots polished to a subtle sheen, and a simple, well-made, steel-gray button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled precisely to my forearms. I looked like exactly what I was, a successful no-nonsense industrial business owner who worked with both his hands and his head, a man of tangible substance, not superficial show. Ron Peterson had offered to come along for moral support, a gesture I appreciated, but I declined with a firm shake of my head. This is family business, Ron, ugly, private family business. I need to handle this myself. But I did not go into that room unarmed. I had enlisted a different, far more potent ally, Betty. I asked her to prepare 2 documents with clinical, devastating precision. The first was a current, meticulously detailed financial summary of Miller Peterson Industrial Holdings, a dossier that laid out in undeniable columns and charts the explosive, diversified growth, the rock-solid assets, the robust and multiplying profitability. It was the birth certificate and life story of my new empire. The second document was a single-page spreadsheet, its formatting ruthlessly clean and cold. It listed, in chronological order, line by unforgiving line, every single monetary loan I had ever advanced to Jason and Chloe since the day each turned 18. Funds for Jason's doomed day trading account and his inventory of luxury watches. Money for Chloe's designer, networking, wardrobe, and her perpetually delayed client rents. Bailouts for maxed-out credit card bills. Down payments on cars they couldn't truly afford. I'd kept a mental ledger all these years, a father's sad, silent accounting, and now Betty had helped me render it physical, legally formatted, with a nominal but legally compounding interest rate applied from each original date of dispersal. The total at the bottom was a staggering, soul-crushing figure, $287,412, not gifts, loans. The conference room at Mike's office was tomb quiet, paneled in dark, solemn wood that seemed to absorb sound and light. I arrived early, deliberately, and took the seat at the head of the long table, a position of unconscious authority. Mike sat to my right, a silent, formidable sentinel. When Diane walked in, guided by a paralegal, it was like seeing a carefully preserved stranger from a forgotten life. She was deeply tanned, her hair several shades lighter and cut in a sharply stylish, expensive-looking bob. She wore a sleek, cream-colored designer dress that screamed of Miami boutiques and looked utterly, absurdly out of place in a Rockford law office. She carried herself with a brittle, rehearsed confidence, but her eyes, when they briefly flicked up to meet mine, darted away instantly, unable to hold the gaze of the man she had discarded. Her lawyer, Aldrich, followed, a man in his 50s with a slick, gray-flecked ponytail, a tan so perfect it looked spray-painted, and a smile that was all condescending professionalism as he shook hands around the table. On the large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall, the faces of Jason and Chloe flickered to life. They were sitting on a sunny balcony, a blur of palm fronds and azure sky in the background. Jason looked uncomfortable, stuffed into a too-tight polo shirt, while Chloe wore enormous dark sunglasses that hid her eyes completely, a final, fragile barrier between her and the crushing reality of this room. "Shall we begin?" Aldrich opened, settling into his chair and unclasping a fine leather portfolio with a soft, self-important snap. "My client is here in good faith to resolve these most unfortunate disputes. We believe a global, sensible settlement is within reach. She is prepared to drop her claims to the business property in exchange for a lump sum payment, which we have calculated as her fair community property share of the marital assets, plus a reasonable percentage of recent business revenue." He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table towards me. The number typed at the bottom was astronomical, a fantasy figure, clearly based on a grossly inflated valuation of the old, defunct Hanks Heavy Machinery, and not the dynamic new entity I had built from its bones. It was a naked shakedown, a demand for a ransom paid with money I didn't have for a property she never rightfully owned. I didn't reach for the paper. I let his words dissolve into the heavy, waiting silence of the room. I looked past Aldrich, past his performative gravitas, straight at Diane. "Community property," I said, my voice low, steady, and devoid of any emotion except a cold, factual clarity. "Interesting concept. You mean the property you fraudulently obtained a significant loan against by deliberately hiding my rightful ownership. The property your own father gave to me, in writing, for giving him purpose." I gave a slight nod to Mike. Without a word, he slid copies of the notarized codicil across the table, the pages coming to rest directly in front of Aldrich and, with a gentle push, one in front of Diane. Aldrich's practiced, smarmy smile faltered, crumbling at the edges as he quickly scanned the document. On the monitor, Jason leaned forward, squinting at his camera as if trying to read the small print from 1,000 miles away. "What is that?" he muttered, his voice tinny and small through the speakers. "Or," I continued, my tone unchanging, a relentless factual drumbeat, "are we talking about the community property you unilaterally liquidated and stole? The $285,000 you electronically transferred out of our accounts the day before you coordinated my abandonment at an airport gate?" Mike then placed the detailed bank records next to the codicil, the transaction lines highlighted in stark yellow. Diane's face beneath its expensive tan visibly paled. "We didn't steal," she began, her voice tight and defensive, but I cut her off not with a shout but with the simple, relentless force of my continuation. "Or perhaps," I said, my gaze now shifting to the large screen, locking onto the pixelated faces of my children, "we should first discuss the other, long-standing debts within this family before we entertain any conversation about what you believe you are owed." I nodded towards the door. Betty, who had been waiting silently in the hallway, entered with the quiet efficiency of a seasoned quartermaster. She placed the thick, impressive financial summary of Miller Peterson Holdings directly in front of Aldrich, and then, With a deliberate motion, set the single-page loan spreadsheet squarely in front of Diane, rotating it so the columns of numbers faced her. "This," I said, pointing a firm finger at the summary in front of Aldrich, "is what I built in the 3 weeks after you left me with nothing but a note and stolen capital. Miller Peterson Industrial Holdings, profitable, growing, valuable, a legitimate enterprise." I paused, letting the sheer weight of that statement settle over the room like lead. Then I tapped the loan spreadsheet in front of Diane, my index finger hitting the paper with a soft but definitive thud that echoed in the quiet room. "And this is what you all took from me over the last 15 years. $287,412. With calculated interest, the figure exceeds $300,000. You want a settlement? Fine, here is my offer. You all three of you drop every claim to my business, my property, every single asset. You sign a full, final, and binding release of all claims past, present, and future. And you begin immediate repayments on these documented personal loans. We can establish a payment plan. I am willing to be generous. $100 per month from each of you." The room for a split second was frozen in absolute disbelieving silence. Then it erupted. Aldrich spluttered, his professional veneer shattering, ranting about the legality of such so-called loans and unenforceable familial gifts. Diane stared at the list of numbers, her mouth compressed into a thin, bloodless, hard line, her eyes scanning the dates and amounts, a brutal, undeniable chronology of her children's prolonged dependency and her own complicity. On the monitor, Chloe finally ripped off her oversized sunglasses, her eyes wide with shock and swimming with sudden horrified tears. "Dad, those were gifts. You said you were helping us." Jason's face flushed a deep, angry red, his hands coming up in a gesture of furious disbelief. "This is blackmail. This is insane." I stood up then slowly, my movement drawing all the chaotic, splintered energy in the room to a sudden focused point. I leaned forward, placing my knuckles firmly on the solid oak table. The solid, resonant thump made everyone, even the blustering Aldrich, jump slightly. "No," I said, my voice dropping into a register of pure, unyielding iron, a tone that brooked no argument, a sound that came from the forge of the last month. "Blackmail is draining joint financial accounts and fleeing the country. Blackmail is hiding a father's true will and letting a man pay a mortgage for 30 years on a property he already owned. This is called an accounting. This is called consequences. You looked at me and you saw a used-up old man, a piece of furniture to be left behind. You were wrong. You abandoned a craftsman in his own workshop with his own tools, and now he has built something you can no longer afford to break." I let my gaze travel across each of them, Diane's shocked, pale face, the flickering, distorted images of my children on the screen, their masks of outrage now slipping into confusion and raw fear. "The offer is on the table. You have 48 hours to accept it in its entirety. After that, we proceed full force with the lawsuit for fraud, theft, and financial exploitation. The IRS, I should add, will be profoundly interested in that cash hoard your father left, Diane, and your failure to report it. And I will personally call in these personal loans in full immediately by filing suit in civil court. Think very carefully about what multiple judgments for fraud and unsecured debt will do to your credit scores, to your ability to rent an apartment, lease a car, secure any future, to your new, supposedly colorful life." I did not wait for a response. I did not look back. I turned on my heel and walked out of the conference room, the sound of my work boots on the hardwood floor the only noise in the wake of my departure. I left behind a silence so deep, so profound, it felt like a physical suffocating entity in the room. The trap I had laid was not merely a legal maneuver. It was a comprehensive, inescapable snare, financial, emotional, and deeply moral. And with my final words, I had felt it spring shut with a quiet, definitive, and irrevocable click. The 48-hour deadline passed not in a state of anxious waiting, but in a tense, electric quiet that I filled with the purposeful noise of my own creation. I didn't hover by the phone or refresh my email. I was in the shop, my true sanctuary, personally overseeing the installation and calibration of a massive new CNC plasma cutter, a computer-guided beast of a machine that represented the final leap from a repair shop to a full-scale fabrication house, a tool that could cut intricate parts from steel plate with laser-like precision, taking our capabilities and our potential contracts to a whole new level. The harmonic hum of its servos, the sharp, ozone-tinged scent of hot metal being sliced, the focused discussion with the technician. This was my reality, my proof of concept, my living answer to their betrayal. I was actively, physically building the tangible future while I knew they were desperately, pathetically scrambling to salvage a past that had been constructed entirely on a foundation of lies and stolen money. Their formal response did not arrive as a signed agreement or a counter-proposal. It manifested as a series of cascading, personal collapses, like a line of dominoes that had been tapped by the first, decisive flick of my finger in that conference room, each far more revealing and more devastating than the last. The first domino was Jason. He called my personal cell phone, the one number I had deliberately not changed, late on the second night, his voice emerging from the speaker not with its usual entitled bluster but with a ragged, broken texture that was barely recognizable. Pop. A long, hollow pause filled with staticky breath. I'm sorry. The words were so foreign, so utterly unexpected coming from him, that I simply held the phone to my ear and listened, my own breath still. The money, it's all gone. Mom's guy, the one in the suit from the city, his name was Richard. He said he was a venture capitalist. He had this sure thing, a luxury resort development on some private island in the Bahamas. He said our money would triple in 6 months. Mom put almost all of it in, the cash from the accounts, everything. The whole thing, it was a complete scam. Pop. Richard's vanished. The development is just a fenced-off patch of mosquito-filled swamp. The lawyers down here are costing us a fortune just to tell us there's nothing they can do. We're broke. The credit cards are maxed out. Chloe's having panic attacks. He was crying now, soft, wet, shameful hiccups that shuddered down the line. She said you'd never fight. Mom said you'd just accept it and fade away. We were so stupid. We were all so stupid. The second domino was Chloe. Her collapse came not as a voice call, but as a torrential flood of tearful, grammatically chaotic, rambling text messages that lit up my phone screen the next morning. A complete and total emotional meltdown transmitted digitally. The carefully curated facade of the glamorous, aspiring designer was utterly gone, stripped away to reveal the terrified, indebted child beneath. Daddy, I'm so scared, I don't know what to do. He left us, and the apartment is so expensive, and they're going to sue us, and I have no money for food, and I just want to come home, please, I just want to come home. The tropical paradise they had purchased with my stolen life savings had curdled overnight into a claustrophobic prison of debt, humiliation, and piercing regret. The third and final domino was Diane herself. She did not call. Her capitulation was delivered through the now humbled channel of her lawyer, Aldridge, who called Mike. The tone of the conversation, as Mike related to me, was completely transformed. No more slick bravado, no more legal posturing. It was just weary, drained, professional surrender. His clients, he said, were prepared to accept Mr. Miller's terms in their entirety. They would sign the full release, relinquishing all claims to any property, business, or asset, past or future. They would not contest the validity of the codicil. In return, they begged, Aldrich used the word begged, for the personal loan repayment schedule to be formally waived, or at least suspended indefinitely, as they had absolutely no means to pay. Their final, desperate request was that Hank not pursue criminal fraud charges with the local district attorney or press the IRS issue any further. They were, for all intents and purposes, laying down their arms and surrendering unconditionally. Mike brought the thick, finalized settlement agreement to me at the shop a few days later. I wiped my greasy hands on a rag, took the document, and flipped past the dense legalese directly to the signature pages. There they were in 3 distinct scripts. Diane K. Miller, her signature loopy but tense. Jason R. Miller, his letters cramped. Chloe M. Miller, her signature looking surprisingly small and childish. their names signed on the dotted line, formally signing away any legal or moral claim to my life, my work, my future. I took a cheap ballpoint pen from my shirt pocket, the kind I used to mark steel cuts and sign packing slips, and hesitated for only a second, not out of doubt or weakness, but out of a final fleeting moment of silence for the ghosts of the family I had thought I was providing for, a respect paid to the innocent fiction that had died a gate B-42. Then I bent and signed my name with a firm, clear, unhurried stroke. Henry J. Miller. It was done. The aftermath was swift and quiet, an anticlimax. The end did not return to Rockford. We learned through the brittle grapevine of extended family. My brother Dave heard from a distant cousin that she had moved into a cramped, modest apartment in Tampa, Florida, and had taken a job as a receptionist at a busy dental clinic. The glamorous Miami chapter closed for good. The tropical dream was extinguished, replaced by the fluorescent glow of a waiting room and the taste of disinfectant. Jason, after a month of radio silence, called again, swallowing what granules of pride he had left. He asked humbly if there might be any work at the shop, clarifying, not a management job or anything, just labor. I'll sweep floors, load trucks, anything. I told him truthfully that I would think about it. I wasn't ready for that complexity, that daily reminder, not yet. Chloe, after a few weeks couchsurfing at a friend's place in Florida, did physically come home, not to my house. That door was closed, but back to Illinois. She got a job as a waitress at a diner, started seeing a therapist twice a week to deal with the crushing guilt and the fallout of her shattered illusions. She came by the shop one overcast afternoon, looking younger, softer, and more fragile than I had seen her in a decade, the expensive armor of her style completely gone. We didn't talk much. I bought her a cup of bitter coffee from the ancient pot in the office. She cried quiet tears that dripped into the styrofoam cup. I put a clumsy, calloused hand on her shoulder for a moment. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a ceasefire, a temporary armistice and a silent, mutual recognition of the terrible, shared damage that now lay between us like a scarred landscape. The victory, when I finally allowed myself to acknowledge it, wasn't sweet. It was somber. Heavy like a stone placed in the center of my chest. I would stand on my 2 acres at the end of a long day, watching the yard lights come on over the warehouses and the parked equipment, the buzz of legitimate, prosperous industry now the soundtrack of my life, and I would feel the immense weight of it all. I had won. By every metric that mattered, I owned everything. The clear title land, the thriving business, my uncompromised freedom, my self-determined future. But the cost, the visceral, human cost, was the complete and total loss of the family I had believed I was building it all for. The love, I now understood, had been a convenient fiction, a long-running financial and emotional arrangement I had been too loyal, too blind to see clearly, in systematically destroying their malicious fantasy of a life without me. I had also been forced to incinerate my own innocent, cherished fantasy of a family that never truly was. There was no celebration, no triumphant roar. There was just the deep, resonant, and echoing quiet of a long, brutal battle finally ended, and the solemn understanding that the rest of my life would be the long, slow, daily work of rebuilding something entirely different, something honest and alone, from the scorched and barren rubble they had left behind. Time, as the worn-out saying goes, does its patient, impersonal work. It doesn't magically heal wounds of that depth. Rather, it forms a tough, fibrous scab over them, a protective layer that allows you to move, to work, to breathe and function around the permanent, dull ache that has taken up residence in the center of your being, a familiar companion you learn to acknowledge without letting it steer. A full year passed, a cycle of seasons that saw Miller Peterson Holdings not just stabilize but aggressively grow, its roots now digging deep into the fertile ground of solid reputation and smart diversification. We bought the struggling, outdated machine shop next door, a logical expansion, and integrated its space and its 2 best machinists into our operation, bringing our total employees to 23. All good, solid people who showed up on time, did honest, skilled work with pride, and went home to their own families and lives, their loyalty earned daily through fair pay and clear respect. Ron and I had settled into an unlikely but profoundly effective partnership. Two old dogs who had learned very different tricks, but shared a fundamental language of grit and results. We'd meet every Friday morning in my office, drink the terrible tar-like coffee the shop pot produced, and look over the numbers, our conversation a shorthand of grunts and nods. And he never, not once, mentioned my family or the past, his silence on the matter a greater sign of respect than any empty platitude. He just respected the hustle, the turnaround, the sheer tonnage of what had been built from ruin. The lingering lawsuit with First Rockford Trust over the original fraudulent loan was settled definitively in our favor. The bank's lawyers, eager to avoid the scandalous discovery process and potential regulatory attention, quietly agreeing to forgive the entire remaining debt and offering a formal, written apology for their failure to catch the title discrepancy decades prior, a document I filed away without fanfare. The official, updated deed to the land and all its buildings now hung in a simple black frame on the wall of my office, a piece of paper that held the weight of a lifetime. Henry J. Miller, sole owner. One cold, bright, crystal-clear Saturday morning in late autumn, when the air was sharp and the sunlight fell in long, clean slabs through the high shop windows, I was in early, alone, immersed in a personal project. The slow, meticulous restoration of an old 1967 Ford F-100 pickup I'd found rusting in a farmer's field, a truck from my own teenage era. This work was pure therapy, a meditation in steel, the methodical, satisfying process of taking apart, of carefully cleaning decades of grime and decay, of evaluating each component for repair or replacement, of slowly, patiently reassembling something functional and beautiful from neglect. I was elbow-deep in the engine bay, the world narrowed to the grip of a wrench and the alignment of a bolt, when the main shop door creaked open on its heavy hinges, a sound that echoed in the vast, quiet space. I looked up from the naked engine block, my vision refocusing from the micro to the macro. It was Jason. He looked profoundly different, thinner, leaner, the softness of his previous life completely pared away, leaving a harder, more angular frame. The entitled, impatient gloss was gone from his eyes, replaced by a watchful, uncertain wariness. He was holding a metal toolbox, a modest, serviceable one, not the expensive kit I'd bought him years ago. "Hey, Pop," he said, his voice tentative, testing the word, the sound barely carrying across the concrete floor. "Jason," I replied, my own voice neutral, giving nothing away as I straightened up, wiping my hands slowly on a red shop rag. I heard you were restoring an old truck from a guy at Jensen's. I remember you talking about wanting to do that a long time ago." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the toolbox hanging heavy at his side. "I've been working over at Jensen's Auto for a few months now. Oil changes, tire rotations, basic stuff, learning. I'm not here asking for a job, not really. I was just wondering if maybe you could use an extra pair of hands on a weekend. Unpaid, no strings, just to learn the right way." I looked at him for a long, silent minute, the only sound the distant hum of the shop's overhead heaters. In that stretched moment, I saw a triple exposure. The ghost of the little boy who used to follow me around this very shop, his small hands eagerly handing me wrenches, his eyes wide with uncomplicated admiration for what his dad could do. The superimposed image of the arrogant, dismissive young man who had taken my money, my labor, my quiet love as his due, a natural entitlement. And finally, the clear, sharp picture of the broken, humbled and uncertain man standing before me now, his pride shattered, seeking not a handout but a hand up, HOWEVER Chinese letter LY offered. The anger, that cold, hard stone of betrayal, was still there, a permanent lodestone in my gut. But I realized with a clarity that surprised me that it was no longer the only thing residing there. Other materials had been mixed into the alloy, a grudging recognition of pain acknowledged, a sliver of pity for lessons learned too late, and the mechanic's eternal, calculating assessment of what might be salvageable. "The coffee in the office," I said finally, my voice low but clear, nodding toward the small, glass-walled room at the back of the shop. "It's terrible, always is. Get yourself a cup if you want. Then grab a wire brush and a scraper from the bench over there. Start on the frame, rust on the passenger side. Scrape it down to clean, bare metal, every speck, no shortcuts. A flicker of something complex and powerful, a mixture of profound relief, fragile hope, and sheer, determined resolve crossed his face, tightening his jaw and brightening his eyes for just an instant. "Yes, sir," he said, the words crisp and clear. "Not Pop, not Dad, sir." A term of respect offered to the craftsman, to the foreman, to the owner of the shop. Not a familial demand from a son, but an earned acknowledgement of the space he was asking to enter. He set his toolbox down carefully on the concrete and walked toward the office. I turned my attention back to the engine block on the stand, picking up a torque wrench, my hands falling back into their practiced rhythm. The sun had climbed higher, its winter-bright beams streaming through the windows, now alive with swirling motes of dust, and the faint, sparkling haze of metal particles in the air. From the office came the familiar clattering sound of the old coffee pot being handled, the chime of a mug. Then a new sound began, the steady, gritty, rhythmic scrape of a wire brush working against decades of oxidation on steel, a sound of effort, of penitence, of a foundation being painfully, slowly cleared. These were new sounds in the ecology of my shop. Not the echoes of a family I had loved and lost, not the ghostly laughter of a past that was a lie, but the tentative, uncertain, yet tangible sounds of something new being patiently, carefully rebuilt from the ground up, on a foundation of hard truth and clear-eyed reality this time. It wasn't forgiveness. That was a bridge too far, its plans not yet drawn. It was simply a clear-eyed assessment of salvageable parts. Maybe, just maybe, with enough time and honest labor, something entirely new, something functional and true, could be slowly fabricated from the wreckage they had all created. Not what it was before. That blueprint was ashes. Something different. Something honest. I owned the land, free and clear. I owned the business, thriving and multifaceted. I owned my days, my decisions, my peace. And in that hard-won, unassailable ownership, as the scrape of the wire brush formed a steady counterpoint to my own work, I was finally beginning to understand on a bone-deep level that the most valuable thing you can ever truly own, the one asset no one can steal, leverage, or abandon, is your own unshakable integrity, and the quiet, steadfast, immeasurable power that flows from the fundamental knowledge that you can survive any storm. You can diagnose and repair what is broken, and you can, with your own two hands and your own stubborn will, build something that endures. They say living well is the best revenge, and I used to think that was just a hollow platitude, something people whispered to themselves to ease the sting of powerlessness, to coat a bitter pill in the sugar of philosophy. Now I understand, with the clarity that comes only from having walked through the fire, that it isn't a comforting saying. It's a practical, actionable blueprint for survival and triumph. Revenge in its raw, primitive form is about meeting hate with hate, an eye for an eye, but that path only guarantees two piles of rubble where lives once stood. Real revenge, the enduring kind, is a transformative alchemy. It's about taking the sheer, unvarnished betrayal, the deep personal hurt, the profound abandonment, all that corrosive negative energy they aim to destroy you with, and funneling it into a furnace of your own making, using it as pure, potent fuel. Fuel to build something so meticulously solid, so authentically real, so unshakably and uniquely yours, that the people who wronged you gradually shrink in your own rear view, becoming insignificant, fatting ghosts dwarfed by the monumental shadow of what you've created in their absence. They looked at me and made a fatal calculation. They wanted to render me obsolete, to discard me like outdated machinery. Instead, through their act of cruel disposal, they inadvertently became the catalyst that forced a complete and total upgrade, not just of my business, but of my very soul. The ultimate lesson, then, isn't about getting even. It's about getting better, sharper, and undeniably stronger. It's about having the courage to look squarely into the mirror after the very worst has happened and realizing, with a calm certainty, that the person staring back is fundamentally superior, stronger, wiser, infinitely more capable than the one who stood there before the storm. You can't control the tempests that life sends to batter you. You can't control the fair weather crew who chooses to abandon ship when the clouds gather and the waves rise. But your power, your absolute sovereignty, lies in controlling the harbor you choose to build for yourself in the aftermath. Pour every lesson into its foundations. Use the wreckage they left as your bulkhead. Make it strong enough to weather any future gale. Make it uniquely, unquestionably yours. And then let that harbor, its quiet strength, its secure peace, its thriving activity, stand forever as your only answer, your final word, and your unassailable victory. This is Hank. Thanks for listening.